Hello, thank you for joining us for this seminar. We're going to be talking about the subject of depression with the goal of finding ways to overcome that depression. And with that in mind, what we want to realize is that depression is something that is very hard to explain. For instance, if you're going through it, how do you tell someone what you're going through, what you're feeling, and so forth? To define depression, we would like to say, well, it's a feeling of heaviness, a feeling of weariness that takes from us our strength, our motivation. As a matter of fact, before we get through, we're going to talk about several of the side effects of depression. But with it, again, we can't really, how can I tell you? The only way I can tell you, and I will in a moment or so, because I went through this depression, the only way I can tell you about the depression is to tell you some of the things that happened to me when I was going through it. As a matter of fact, for years we've been counseling individuals on this subject of depression, and that's why we've decided to put this into video form here. But with it, what I have discovered is I cannot tell someone, I know what you're going through. Because the first reaction is probably what my reaction would have been, is you can't know what I'm going through. So I don't even attempt to do that. But what I try to do, and I will do it in just a moment, is to tell individuals what I went through and the struggles I faced with my depression. It was about 6 to 8 weeks in length. And in it, I was asking questions, and I'm sure if you've been there, you asked this question too. God, what did I do to deserve this? What did I do wrong? God, why me? And that type of a question. Well, with it, I did find there was a purpose for it, but it was interesting. I've discovered that the will of God for my life isn't all about me. Okay? The will of God for my life is about others in my life, the lives that I will touch and so forth. And in reality, when I went through this and worked through this, what I've discovered is what I went through in my depression was really more about the people that I would be helping down the line. We've written a book on a biblical pathway through depression. We'll share a little bit about that booklet because this is one of the things that helped me make a turning point. In the booklet, we talk of 7 healthy changes I need to make to overcome depression. And that's going to be one of our goals in this session, is to share those 7 healthy changes I need to make. Our goal is to help you deal with your depression and overcome it. But what I went through is I would get up in the morning and I would get my wife off to, I was a pastor, so I didn't have to punch a clock. I would get my wife off to work, or I forget whether she's going to work or to school or whichever. But anyway, when she was gone, I'd get the kids off and so forth. But I would look at that pillow, want to lay down some more and just say, well, I just don't feel like, I lost my motivation. I don't feel like going anymore. So I'm going to lay down for a couple of hours. Maybe I'll feel better and so forth. I'd get up an hour or so later and I'd feel guilty because I lost that hour. But at the same time, that depression was still there. And so now we're building upon it. My plate, so to speak, was getting fuller and fuller. And so my emotions was now guilt and depression and so forth. And we worked with this and struggled with this for, like I said, about 6 to 8 weeks. As a matter of fact, another thing that happened to me there was, as a pastor, I had the privilege, and this will show up later when we talk about the 7 healthy changes. I would, as a pastor, have to prepare sermons. Well, I couldn't really tell the people that I was talking to and preaching to what I was feeling. It would just, it would get them depressed. So I had to think of positive and focus on positive messages. And again, God help me, show me what you want me to share with the people. And I really didn't share the subject of depression until I had worked my way through it. As a matter of fact, with this, we were able to put together a magazine article that went around the world, Paul Conquers Depression. And with that, we kept the copyright, and then we've added to it 7 healthy changes to overcome depression, and that makes up this booklet that we have, a biblical pathway through depression. But with it, again, the whole idea was when I got out and got to do the preaching and so forth, and all of this will make sense. But the problem was, when I would get done we had services Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday nights. When I'd get done at the end of the day and turn the lights out and cross the road to our parsonage, I could feel that heaviness closing back in. Oh, I was going to face it again tonight. Again, the idea of being occupied and so forth helped a lot, but you've got to come to a point at some time or other where you sit down and relax, and then that's where it was closing in on me, and that's what depression was doing to me. I share that again because I'm thinking if you've gone through it, you can identify with what I'm dealing with. But let's talk about the subject of depression itself. What is depression? Depression is a feeling of heaviness. Depression is something that, again, is an uncomfortable feeling that just doesn't want to go away. Again, I can't describe it to you. I'm trying to find a dictionary definition of it, but that's basically one of the thoughts from the dictionary, an uncomfortable feeling that doesn't want to go away. When I say uncomfortable, its concept is I am not comfortable feeling this way. It's like this burden that feels upon me, that I'm carrying a heavy emotional weight that I can't let go of. And again, for lack of a better way, I'm trying to describe what it feels like. But with it, there's another thing that happens. First of all, it takes control of me. That is, this feeling takes control of my mood, my motivation, the things that I want to do and so forth. It makes it so hard to do them. It's like working with this heavy burden on your shoulders. And with it, let's take a little more definition as to depression to suggest that there are different kinds of depression. Okay? The primary depression and secondary depression. The primary depression is a depression that actually comes in two forms as well. It's not caused by something else, but it's caused by a chemical flow in the brain. And so this is usually handled with medication, because the medication are blockers trying to control the flow of the chemicals in the brain. Now, you've got the two different kinds of primary, and that is bipolar, and that's the mood swings from one to the other. And not knowing, it used to be called manic depression. Mood swings, bipolar, two polars. In other words, at one point it'd be manic, excited and ready to go and do this and do that, and then all of a sudden, for no apparent reason, there's a heaviness and this lack of motivation and not wanting to do anything and so forth. Now, with that, we look at the idea that there's another kind of primary depression, and that's the bipolar and the unipolar. The unipolar is the kind where it is long-lasting. That heaviness and so forth just lasts for long periods of time, and you just don't break out of it right away. It could be 6 months, a year. In some cases, it's been many years. And in most of these cases, medication is usually required because, again, this is affected by the chemical flow of the brain, and that's what the medications have to do. And of course, with that, and we're going to look at some of the other thoughts about medications, because I need to suggest self-medication is not good. That's self-destructive, and we'll talk about that in a moment or so. But with that, I'm given to understand, too, that you need to be in touch with a doctor and need to work with them. And when you're working with them, we also have worked with a behavioral health department. And one of the things we've discovered is some of these medications have side effects. And with the side effects, people don't like them, and so they feel maybe a little bit better, so they'll stop taking them because they don't like the side effects. Then when they stop taking them, they go back into the depression. And it's, again, that's one of the most difficult things of dealing with the mind-swaying and mind-changing medications is the side effects and people stopping taking them, and then they keep going back and forth, back and forth. So again, this is one of the problems, though, with the primary depression. You do need medication for that, and you need to consult a doctor, and you need to follow instructions. As a matter of fact, when people would come to us with this the kind of depression or any kind of depression, one of the things that we check on with them, we would tell them or ask them, are you on medication? And we have one requirement. If you're on medication, we can't give medication. We can't give prescriptions. But we want you to stay in touch with your doctor and don't play with the medications. Because if we can help you deal with it, and that helps get through it, and then all of a sudden you decide, okay, I'm not going to take the medication anymore, then we're right back to square one. So that part, you stay in touch with the doctors. Okay? I can't emphasize that enough when it comes to the primary depression. Now, I like to talk primarily about secondary depression, and secondary depression is just what it implies. Secondary depression is something that comes from something else happened. And we'll share several things here in a moment. I've got a list of things, and I might not even touch whatever's happening in your life as the list. But these things happen, and they cause depression. Now, when people come to us, one of our goals is, and that's one of my challenges in this seminar, is to help you find ways to deal with the cause of the depression. if we can find the cause, what's inspiring or bringing on this depression, and you can manage that a little bit better. For instance, one of the things that causes depression is stress. Well, if we can help you manage the stress, or if you can choose to find ways to manage your stress, then maybe you can manage your depression a little more. That's one of our goals. Okay, so with this in mind then, what we're talking mostly about is finding ways to deal with the secondary depression. And really it's called secondary because something else causes it. Okay, and so again, one of our goals is to try to find ways of dealing with the something else. But okay, the 7 healthy changes we're talking about will work for both kinds of depression, in the sense there are things I need to do. You do not beat depression in a passive way. You have to become active. You have to do something about it. You don't just sit by, and even with the medications, just sitting by and waiting for the medications to take over is not a healthy way to deal with depression. So with this in mind, and incidentally, let me share something else. I was talking once with a pharmaceutical representative, and he was talking about the medications that they use with regards to depression. And one of the interesting things, and please note this because it's very important, one of the interesting things about the medications is that individuals get to the place where they feel, okay, I'm doing better and so forth, and so people will watch them, those that are caring for them, those that are aware of their circumstance and looking out for them, they will watch them and they'll say, oh, they're doing better now. And so they will avoid them a little bit. And by avoiding, I don't mean, I mean they'll just let them on their own for a little bit. Then all of a sudden, this is the time. You see, depression can also cause suicide, and this is the time when they get enough motivation that they can take the action. You see, one of the problems with depression, again, it takes my motivation from me. And when that happens, then I don't even feel, even if I'm thinking suicide, most often I don't even feel fine. I shouldn't say it doesn't happen this way always, but in some cases I don't feel motivated enough to do it. I just am there bound by this feeling of emptiness, this feeling of loneliness, this feeling of heaviness. I'm just bound by it, and I can't even feel enough to take action. But when the individual starts feeling better with the medication, they can now be motivated, and they can possibly think to themselves, I don't want to go back there, and that might be the time they would plan to take their life. So the reason I'm saying that is what this pharmaceutical rep was sharing with me is just because a person on a medication looks like they're doing better, or just because you feel like you're doing better, don't throw away the concept of you need to be on guard. Keep that in mind. You need to be on guard. You don't ignore these people. You don't ignore their conversation, their threats of suicide and so forth. But on the other hand, you think that, okay, they look like they're getting better, but wait a minute, stay with them, watch them, take the precautions that you need to take. So with that and all, we look at a warning sign of some of the problems that comes with the medication. But now let's look at the primary depression. This is what we want to focus on here. The secondary depression. The secondary depression. What we want to focus on here is what might be causes of secondary depression. We've already used the word stress, okay? Stress is the brain's reaction to a perceived threat and or challenge. Okay, that's a definition that I like to use. The brain's reaction. The reason I say that is that nothing happens in my body. You see, the dictionary definition will say the body's reaction, but nothing happens in my body unless my brain sends a signal. So it's my brain's reaction to a perceived threat and or challenge. I like to use the word perceived in there because what might be a threat or challenge to you might not be to me. So it's up to how the person perceives it. And if we're trying to help an individual deal with depression, we need to know how they perceive the stressors that they're going through. How do they see them? And one of the problems with that is the idea of not in control. That's one of the frustrating things that happens to us. One of the greatest stressors of life is that of change, and life is filled with change, okay? So with this in mind then, when we face that change, and I'm not sure that I can adjust, not sure that I can change to meet that need, I can't change, but the circumstance changes, and all of that brings on the feelings of helplessness, and that's right next door to the feelings of depression. When I feel I can't do anything about it, okay, then I feel depressed. And so with this, one of the interesting factors that we would pursue, and I challenge you to pursue, is Find out what your stressors are. If you're dealing with secondary depression, find out what your stressors are. What are you facing in life that would list as stressors? And if you can't do that, consult with a counselor, consult with someone to help you spell out what might be a stressor, even family members. What might be a stressor in your life? And basically you might say this is what's happening in your life that you can't control. And then the bottom line with all of this, how can you take control of it? Now, when we come to the biblical view of overcoming depression, one of the beautiful things, and I'm going to share a little diagram in a moment here that I think is very important to you, but one of the beautiful things about dealing with stressors is you need to change your focus, and that's one of the things you need to do with regards to depression. You need to change your focus. And one of the things that I found from my faith background, biblical messages, the concept is when I can focus upon the fact that God can change anything. Okay? While I'm not in control, that doesn't mean my God is not in control. So if I change my focus from my problem to my God, and I realize He's in control, and I exercise in a faith in God's ability to control, then I don't have to feel that I'm unable. I don't have to feel overwhelmed by the circumstance, and therefore I can combat my depression with the realization is there is hope. It doesn't have to control me. There is hope. My God is my hope, and He can find a way for me. So there's one key for dealing with, again, the primary cause of stress that causes the secondary depression. So find a way to deal with those stressors. And again, when I find out the idea of believing that God can overcome, what I find too is that God can show me what I need to do to overcome. Indeed, when you're dealing with emotional problems, you cannot afford to put God out of the picture. I know there's a lot of health people out there that, and psychologists, psychiatrists, and so forth that want to squeeze God out of the picture. But indeed, when it comes to the human brain, where did it come from? God created us, a three-part being, a body, a soul, and a spirit. My personality, my mind, my brain, my way I think, and so forth was designed of God, and He knows how to make it function. And He has given us in the Scriptures. As a matter of fact, I'm going to tell you, I've taught several seminars on the subject of stress management. And I found one of the greatest manuals that I could ever find on the subject of stress is the Bible. Matthew chapter 6, for instance, shares a beautiful concept of how to deal with the things that I can't control. How to deal with the tomorrows and so forth. And so my challenge to you is find ways to deal with your stress through faith in the Scriptures. But that's not the only thing. Another thing that causes depression is grief. Grief is a rather new term in the sense that it describes many other feelings. Okay, with grief, there is different emotions. There is shock or denial or, no, this can't be happening. There is the emotion of anger. There's emotion of guilt. Oh, I should have done this if I had done that, and so forth. There's emotion of loneliness. But there's also depression is part of the grief feelings. Now, the beauty of this new term grief is that when you're dealing with the subject of grief, now I know why I'm depressed. I know why I'm wrestling with anger. I know why I go through these things. As a matter of fact, we often deal with grief in this way. We're also a grief counselor, and we deal with grief in this way in the sense of helping the person discover what is causing the depression in their life and letting them see that there's a way to work through it. Again, the depression doesn't have to take over. Doesn't have to. You need to take a move against it. You need to be aggressive in the sense of what you're going to do with it. And so with that, I suggest to you, you go to a grief counselor or grief support groups. And that to me is of great importance because there, when others are sharing with me what they're going through, it gives me the feeling that, okay, it's okay what I'm feeling. There's nothing wrong with me. You see, when I feel this and I don't understand it, then I feel there's something wrong with me. Remember what I said in the beginning? What did I do wrong? And so forth. And there was nothing really wrong with me. I was struggling with circumstances. And so with this in mind, my challenge to you is get involved with grief groups because as you share and hear shared those stories of others, you begin to identify with what's happening and you can say, okay, there's nothing wrong with me. This is a natural part of the grief that I'm facing. And then with that, you can also find ways to deal with the grief. Okay, but again, grief causes secondary depression. So if you learn to deal with the grief, there's a lot of people that avoid this. They don't want to deal with it. They want to bury it, and sometimes the depression won't come on for years. And they can't figure out why all of a sudden this is happening. Well, this is what happens when you don't process some of the grief things that you are facing. Grief, incidentally, is not about death. Grief is about loss, and loss is an event where things will never be the same again. Okay, so think about that. When you retire, grief comes with it. Things will never be the same. You realize that even in marriage, that's right. When you get married, life changes. And I don't know how many situations have come up where individuals have been through all of the excitement of the wedding and all of this, and the honeymoon was great, and all of these things were fantastic. And then all of a sudden, 6 months later, they wonder, why do I feel this way? Because everything has changed. Now, what you have to do with grief, you have to deal with the changes. You don't overcome grief. You learn to deal with it. Okay? You learn to deal with the things that are forever different. And each day, something new will crop up that says, oh, I never expected this. I never thought this would be different. And so you learn to deal with the things that are different. You treat it in an aggressive way. And bit by bit, you get stronger and stronger. Someone once said, it will get easier. And I challenge that. It's not necessarily the idea that it will get easier when you're dealing with grief, but what happens is you'll get stronger and stronger, and that's where the healing process happens. You get stronger and stronger as you deal with the grief, and if that depression is caused by grief, you'll get stronger and stronger as you deal with it. As a matter of fact, we're soon going to be putting together a whole segment on the subject of how to deal with grief. So keep watching these scenarios and these teachings and so forth, and eventually one of them will be out there dealing with the subject of grief. Okay, so another thing that causes low self-esteem. Very important that we build up self-esteem in our children, because someplace down in life they're going to need that to keep a healthy relationship. They're going to need that to deal with healthy circumstances in their life or unhealthy circumstances that create depression. So self-esteem is greatly important. If you know of a person dealing with low self-esteem, keep in mind that they're going to need help someplace. Try to help them. If it's someone, one of your loved ones, one of your children, find ways to build that self-esteem. If it's you dealing with low self-esteem, feeling that you're not worthy, you're not deserving, and so forth, and then with that, you need to get to the place where I can find the ways of building self-esteem. This is another area that we worked with the idea of seeing yourself as God sees you, a project in esteem building. Indeed, God wants you to feel good about yourself. He redeems us from our sins so that he can deal with the guilt. One of the greatest deterrents to self-esteem, to good self-esteem, is guilt. He deals with the guilt by offering us forgiveness. Finding this again in the scriptures and in our faith with God helps us with our self-esteem, and therefore can help us with the eventual feelings of depression that comes from that. We're also looking at the idea of guilt itself. Remember, guilt is part of the grief cycle. But guilt itself, dealing with things of the past that we should have changed, should have done something about, find ways to deal with it, or find ways to find forgiveness. Again, the beautiful thing about my faith in God is when God forgives me, I can forgive myself. And you need to learn how to forgive yourself. If you need to work with a counselor on this one, do so. But you need to find how to forgive yourself. And when I look at the scriptures, the Bible tells me if I confess my sins, he is faithful and just to forgive me of my sins and to cleanse me from all unrighteousness. Well, if that be the case, then why do I have to carry the guilt? Why do I pronounce myself guilty? I don't have to. And again, this is another matter of focus. You see, what I need to realize is I focus on the guilt, the thing that I did wrong that makes me feel guilty. It haunts me. It's about my memory. I need to focus on something else. So what do I focus on? That verse that I just described to you. 1 John, the first epistle of John, chapter 1 and verse 9. If you focus on that, what you're focusing on is the idea that God said he's going to forgive me. I am forgiven. So every time I get this memory of my past, I need to remind myself that I am forgiven. It's a way of dealing with that past. The past will haunt us if we let it. The past will bring the guilt if we let it. And the guilt will bring depression if we let it. We don't have to feel guilty because God has made a plan to keep us from feeling guilty. He calls it forgiveness. I have to turn it over to God. I have to believe that God does what he says he will do. I have to believe that God does forgive. And if he's forgiven me, I do not have to feel guilty. So again, you're dealing with the cause, which will help you deal with the depression. Another factor is negative thinking. I'm quite sure that you probably experienced this, especially if you're dealing with depression, of being around people that are just talking negative all the time. And you get to the point where you say, I got to get away from them. I can't let them control my thinking because indeed it's so negative and it feels depressing. Well, this is one of the problems with depression that prolongs it because it causes us many times to think negatively. One of the most frustrating things that I see with regards to depression is these individuals deal with it by going into soap operas, by going into the theater thoughts of somebody else's problem and all of this, and especially with soap operas, because the concept they want you to keep coming back so they don't resolve the problem in this series. They have to go next and the next and the next to keep getting you back. But what you've done is just taken a few moments away from your negative problems to jump into their negative problems. And it might make you forget yours for a while, but as soon as the TV goes off, now their problem is still in your mind, and now you've got your problem, and the negative thinking just keeps on going. So you've got to do something about your negative thinking. And again, when we look back to the scriptures, we'll look at this idea when we look at the 7 healthy changes. When you look back to the scriptures, you got some positive thinking that's of great importance. Positive thinking that says, I know what God said in his word. I can believe what he said in his word. His word is for me, and I can overcome this depression. You do not beat depression in a passive way. You've got to find a way to take an action. And that focus with regards to negativity is very important. Don't stay in a negative world. Don't think in a negative world. Find thoughts to replace the negative thoughts. I challenge people, how do you forget what you're thinking? Well, I'm thinking a thought and I want to forget that thought, and so I'm thinking that thought that I want to forget. No, you forget that thought. You put it out by giving another thought, by replacing it with another thought. You don't just sit there and wrestle with that thought all night long. But you know, you've gone to bed at night with a worry of the day and it stays on your mind all night long. No, you need to refocus. Don't wrestle with that thought. Don't even wrestle with the idea, well, I can do this, I can do that. No, refocus and think on something else. And there again is the importance of your faith and your understanding of the scriptures. When I think of the promises God has made, I can think on that rather than dwell on my negative thinking. Other causes is that of abuse. One of the problems with abuse is that the abuser makes the person feel guilty so that they will keep quiet about the abuse. Now there's the guilt and the abuse feeling. The feeling of I'm a subject of someone else's abuse. It's not about me, it's about somebody else. My life doesn't have anything to do with me. It has to do with satisfying someone else. And this abuse can take on from childhood or even abuse in a marriage relationship and so forth. Again, if you're being abused, more than likely depression is going to take over. Again, especially if the individual now believes they're worthy of the way they're treating me. Well, if you hadn't have said this, I wouldn't have done this. And so now there's the guilt that goes with it. Again, the concept is you've got to deal with the abuse. You've got to find a way to overcome the abuse and to stop these people from abusing you. Go for help. Talk with individuals that can help you through this process, because you've got to overcome that abuse and deal with that abuse if you're going to deal with the depression. Again, we're talking secondary depression. So if this is here, then the secondary is going to happen. If the abuse is there, then the depression is going to stay there. You've got to deal with that abuse. You've got to put it behind you. And indeed, so many times the memory of that abuse, even if the abuse is behind you, the memory of it is haunting. You've got to deal with the memory of it. Because indeed, as you overcome that, you can also find a way to overcome that secondary depression. Anger is another powerful way to destroy your feelings. That is, emotions. Again, with anger, prolonged anger, things that you hold on to that you should let go of. These things should be processed. Okay? In one of our other segments, we talked about anger management. We need to process these things and get rid of them. We don't want to react, again, when anger is a secondary emotion itself. Something happened to hurt me. It starts with the hurt and turns to anger. You've got to find a way to deal with that hurt so that you can overcome it. Now, if that anger takes over, it's I hurt, want you to hurt. Now we do the hurting and back. We want to react in like kind and do hurting back to the person. And now we feel guilty for that. And here's those spiral emotions that are taking us deeper and deeper and causing depression. No, there's a positive way to deal with anger. You need to find that positive way. There's a positive way to process the anger, to change the circumstance, and to overcome it so that you can feel, I'm now in control. And therefore, the depression doesn't have to control me. The depression doesn't have to keep me down because I don't have to live this way. I don't have to carry the burden of this anger. I need to forgive. The Bible tells us when we pray that we're to pray, Father, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors, those who sin against us. Well, with this in mind then, God has in mind the realization that we need to let it go or we will destroy ourselves. And one of the ways we destroy ourselves is with the idea of the depression that comes with it. Deal with this idea of getting rid of the anger in a positive way that you can deal with it and so forth. Again, we challenge you to look at our segment on the subject of anger management to find positive ways to deal with the anger so that you feel good about it afterwards and you can be stronger than ever. As a matter of fact, venting my anger in the wrong way causes low self-esteem. Now, with that in mind, low self-esteem causes depression. On the other hand, if I can vent my anger and deal with that angry person that's venting their anger on me in a positive way, if I can get it out in a positive way, then I can build my own self-esteem thinking, okay, I can deal with this, I have dealt with this, we will overcome this. Now, when that happens, then I have this positive feeling about myself. And so, again, emotions are all interwoven there, okay? And so with that in mind, I have this positive feeling about myself because I have overcome this. I put it behind me. As a result, then, I don't have to feel depressed because I feel negative about myself. Well, let's go on now. I want to talk about some of the side effects of depression. This, if you're going through depression, this will be something you can identify with. Okay, the side effects of depression, number one, is the loss of interest. You lose interest in things. Well, why would I lose interest? I mean, things that I've been very interested in and like to do and so forth, but suddenly I've lost interest in. Well, one of the reasons for that is depression causes a loss of motivation. If I can't get motivated to go ahead and do this, get motivated to accomplish this task or work on this project, then I eventually lose interest in the project. So depression will take the motivation from me. I don't feel motivated to do it. If I don't feel motivated, I lose interest. And so the things that I once took interest in, I'm no longer interested in it. Are you identifying with me? If you're going through depression, those are probably two of the basic things that you feel as a side effect. Fatigue is another one. Kind of interesting. While you're feeling the idea they're not motivated, so you might just sit there all day, but that doesn't mean you don't get tired, okay? Fatigue, your body is still wrestling with emotional things. Remember the chemical flow of the brain? Incidentally, when I said primary and secondary, that the primary has to do with the chemical flow of the brain, well, so also does the secondary. But the secondary, you see, these stressors and so forth will affect the chemical flow of the brain. So if I can deal with the cause of the secondary, then I can also deal with the chemical flow of the brain. This doesn't mean you don't need medication, and that I have to say is between you and the doctor, you and your psychiatrist, okay? But what I also look at is the idea if I can find ways to overcome these, I can find ways to find healing from it. And find healing from the depression and so forth. So with this in mind, your body is still wrestling with these things, and so there's a fatigue. One of the reasons you don't have motivation is you don't feel strong enough to. You don't feel like I can, so there's a fatigue that comes from even just sitting there. Okay, loneliness. One of the problems with depression is no one understands what I'm feeling, so I can't share it with anyone. I don't know how to tell them, and so I draw into myself. and there comes loneliness. On the other hand, if I express depression enough, people don't like to be around that negative. We already spoke about that. They don't want to be around that negative expression, and so they avoid us. And so loneliness is one of the side effects of depression. Guilt. It's kind of interesting. We've said that guilt and stress is another one. Guilt and stress cause depression. But this cycle can go around because depression can cause guilt and can cause stress. Just think of the idea of dealing with something you can't control. I can't control my depression, so I'm stressed by it. Okay? Dealing with something that haunts me of my past and so forth, here comes the guilt. One of the problems of depression, a lot of people feel that, well, especially when you're talking to the room of faith and so forth, a lot of people says, well, there's something wrong with your faith because you shouldn't feel depressed. Well, depression is a mental problem, okay? I mean, it's part of the physical world, but it's a mental problem. Again, it has to do with chemical flow, and it's just as real as a broken arm or a broken leg. But you don't have to feel guilty because you're feeling depressed. But a lot of people try to keep that in themselves, especially people of faith. They don't want you to know that they're feeling depressed because they think you're going to condemn them. There's nothing to feel guilty about when it comes to depression. It is part of the mental cycle of the human being. It is part of the things that we go through. Indeed, depression can be anything from feeling moody because of a cloudy day to going through a circumstance where that mood controls my ability to respond. But depression is very much a part of life, and you don't have to feel guilty because of that depression or the battle that you're having with depression. But it is a side effect, makes you feel guilty. Another one is suicide. Now, we don't have the time to go into the details of this in this particular segment, but one of these segments that we're going to put together will deal with the subject of suicide. We have already touched on the idea of when we're starting to overcome the medical, with the medical use, we're starting to overcome the primary depression. We've already touched on that. But again, suicide can be a side effect of depression. I just don't like the way I'm feeling. When I get enough ambition, enough motivation, I'll take my life out, and that's not an answer by any means. What you're doing there is you're passing your depression on to all your family members. What you're doing there is creating problems for others as well, and that is not a healthy thing to do. And especially for yourself, again, that's not a way out. I've often thought, when I was going through my depression, I thought about this, and this was interesting. I thought the Bible describes hell. Going back to the Bible, it describes hell as a place where the worm dieth not and the fire is not quenched. And I've heard the definition, where their worm dieth not. It means that the thing that they were overtaken by way of sin, the sin that controlled them, won't stop when they go into eternity. It'll be there to haunt them forever and forever and forever. And I can remember sitting there one day and thinking about this. I want to be rid of this feeling, and if I take my life, I'll have this feeling forever and forever and forever. I cannot do that. So don't think that suicide is a way out from depression. It is not. But too many times it is a side effect of depression because people are misled. Anger. We've said that anger is a cause of depression, but anger is also caused by depression. Okay? It's another one of those cycles. I can be angry with myself, angry with others because they don't understand me, angry with the world because things aren't going together right and so forth. And that anger will cause more depression, but the depression causes more anger. I'm describing to you a very difficult world, but I'm trying to share this with you so that you can realize, yes, it is a real world. People do understand what you're going through, and we need for you to know that. We need for you to reach out and find help. Feelings of helplessness and despair. Feelings of helplessness is right next door to the depression. Okay? It's right next door. Helpless, I can't change this and so forth. But the depression also makes me feel helpless. There's my motivation. There's my interest. It's gone because I feel helpless. I can't do anything about it. And then there's feelings of rejection. People that don't want to be around me because I talk too negative. I talk about my depression. I'm trying to make them understand, but they don't understand. As a result, then, we wind up pushing these people away from us, and we now feel rejected. They don't even want to talk to me. One of the problems dealing with the doctors and so forth, we get the feeling and the impression that they don't want to talk to us. Why so? Maybe they've heard our story so much. Now, please, please don't buy into the idea that they don't want to talk to you. Don't buy into the idea that they're not listening. Indeed, if you feel that way, then find one who will listen. But feelings of rejection are very much a part of the side effects of depression. Feelings that people don't want to spend time with me. They don't want to hear what I've got to say. Another thing that we want to point out here is very important is a lot of people will use alcohol and drugs to deal with their depression. Okay? They will use the alcohol and the drugs, but what happens with that is that makes them feel good for a while. But then when that effect wears off, and now the depression is even worse than before. And so now I've got to take more drugs, more alcohol, and now we're on that concept of very close to suicide. Because when you take these mind-altering drugs, you're not thinking clearly. And again, those are the cases where I feel like, oh, I've got to end this all. And because you're not thinking clearly, you may pursue that action. And again, it only worsens it because once it starts to wear off, it's worse. So now we're building an addiction. We've got to drink more, we've got to use more drugs and so forth, and now we're dangerously coming close to destroying ourselves. So drugs and alcohol are not an answer to depression. When it comes to the depression of grief, there's so many people. I have a grief support group that I work with, and there are people there from rehab programs. And it's like now they're trying to overcome their drugs because they use drugs to bury their depression of the grief and so forth. And now as they try to overcome the drugs, they're facing the grief all new again. And it's like, oh, what a vicious circle they're running in. It's very difficult. Don't go in that direction. Okay, if you're using medication, you do what the doctor tells you. Okay, now I've taken so much time, and I hope I haven't discouraged you, but I've taken so much time talking about the side effects, the understanding of depression. Now I want to share with you 7 healthy changes. In a moment or so, I'm going to take you to the Bible. Okay? The reason I'm going to do that is because when I was going through my depression, I was sitting on the edge of the bed one morning and reading the scriptures, and I read this statement by the Apostle Paul, and we'll share it with you in a moment or so. But it suddenly dawned on me, Paul is going through depression. This is what I'm feeling right now. And I began to search the scriptures, and I found all of the reasons, the things that would cause depression, all of the reasons that Paul was feeling depressed. But I also discovered he worked his way out of it. And with that, we found 7 healthy changes that you have to make. Now, pencil and paper ready, please, because here's some things that you can do. You can do to change it. Okay, first of all, I must change my environment. One of the problems with me is as I would lay down and put my head on that pillow and go through this again, another hour, another day, and day after day doing this, okay, I had to get up and get out. One of the things that I would do because I was a pastor, I would get up and go make visits at the hospital. Now at the hospital, that can be somewhat depressing, but I can still remember one day walking down the hallway thinking, I can go home. That person can't. That person has to lay there and wait for someone to tell them what's wrong and when they can go home and so forth. I can go home. I don't have it so bad. The act was causing me to refocus. I was focusing on a different situation and so forth. But I had changed my environment. The longer you look at that pillow and want to lay there, the worse it gets, the more captivating it becomes. So you've got to change your environment. And incidentally, if you're dealing with individuals who can't change your environment, that is, you're working with invalids that are battling depression, change the environment. That is, change the pictures on the wall. Move the furniture around from time to time. Put new curtains on. Okay? Find ways to change that environment so that from week to week or month to month, doesn't have to be huge things, but sometimes just, you know yourself, if you move the furniture around in your apartment or something, somehow it feels like it's a new apartment and it feels a little different. So my challenge to you, if you're working with these people, is find ways to change that environment for them. From month to month, something new, something planned. Even if it's a new picture on the wall, but find something, even if it's the changing of the color of their bedspreads or their blankets or their pajamas that they're wearing and so forth. Find something that will be a change for them that they can see change happening. Okay? So you need to change your environment. You need to change your focus. One of the problems with depression is that heavy feeling is there. That heavy feeling is there. And it's like that it captivates my focus. That's all I can think about is, why am I feeling like this? I know I went through that. But I've got to change my focus. I've got to find something else to focus on. And this is what happens when I made visits with the hospital. This is what happens when I talk to other people, and I made a point of including other individuals in my day. I would change my focus. I'm now talking about what they want to talk about. I'm listening to what they're going through. I can't focus on me with them because it'll make them feel different and even worse. So I've got to let them share with me, and I got to focus on what they're sharing. Change your focus. One of the beautiful things about me is when I had to prepare a sermon, I couldn't preach. Like I said before, I couldn't preach what I was feeling, so I changed my focus. What was the focus of the sermon? I had to focus on something different. So you've got to change your focus. Let me share something with you beautiful in this chart here, okay? So with this, though, we're going to, trying to find my marker here. Where we got a marker? Sorry for stepping out of the screen there, but let me share something with you. Changing of your focus. Remember we spoke of the idea of feeling helpless, I can't control this, and so forth. Well, do yourself a favor. With your pen and paper there, draw yourself this line, okay? This line. That is your lifeline, okay? That's the picture of who I am from beginning to end. Now, when I know Christ as my Savior, there is no end. That's the beauty of that, is realize there's eternal life. I'd live forever with Him. But anyway, let's put God in His rightful place. Put God above the line. He's above everything in your life, in my world, in my circumstances. God is higher than all of it. You know what I found out about God? I found out that God never gets a surprise. He will not get a surprise. Okay? He knows everything. So here we go. Here's my beginning, right? And the time of my beginning, God knew everything about my life. He knew everything I was going to face. He knows what I'm facing right now. In your depression, He knows what you're facing, okay? This is your depression. And this little circle here is you. Okay? You and your depression. The more you focus on your depression, the bigger it gets. And that's where it becomes controlling and overwhelming. But now, God knew that depression was coming the day you were born. He knows what's coming. It's no surprise to Him. One of the problems I deal with when I go through circumstances is, I never expected this. But then I'm reminded, but God did. He knows everything. Okay, so He knew this day was coming. But here, God knows everything, so He knows your future. He knows your future. Now here's the beautiful part of all of this. God has told you what your future is. Okay? Got your pencil handy there? God has told you what your future is. Romans, the book of Romans in the New Testament, chapter 8 and verse 28. Okay, write that down, look it up, and write it out. Romans 8:28. What does it say? And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are the called according to His purpose. God says, I know about your depression, but I know I'm going to bring good out of it. I've got good plan for you. One of the things I can promise you is that God has good plan for you. It's for your good and His glory. Even though this doesn't seem good, and believe me, it didn't to me, but God plans to bring good out of it. Now, what is this to you? Remember what we're talking about? Changing your focus. You can focus on your problem, or you can focus on His promise. Now, when it comes to changing your focus, my challenge to you is focus on the promises of God. Another reason why you need to use your faith to overcome your depression. Use your faith to deal with your stressors. Use your faith to bring things back into control, even though you aren't in control maybe, but God is, and here's the picture. God knows all about it. He knew it was coming, and He's going to bring something good out of it for you. I remember I went through the depression of, it was depression related to grief. Again, grief is not about death, it's about loss. And what happened there is, after 25 years pastoring the same church, I found it necessary to make a choice to move on to the role of a chaplain and to keep this role of counseling going and so forth. And so with that in mind, it was a huge change. 25 years in that same church, and suddenly it was all changed. And wow, did I feel depression. Day after day, I was reminding God, I had to go out and find an apartment. For 6 months, we were living in an apartment somebody gave to us free rent because the picture was we didn't know, they just wanted to help us get started because we didn't know how to even rent an apartment, what to even look for and all that. So with that in mind then, it's like day after day I was working in a hospital, so you write a date on the top of your paper for each chart that you filled in. And with that date I was thinking, but one day less and I still don't know where to go. For 6 months we struggled. It was in the 6th month that we found the place that we're living in now. But again, this whole idea of things are now forever different. How do I cope with the difference? Kind of fascinating because with all of that, I was focusing day by day. God, you promised me good. You promised me good. I found it. The ministry we now have is a ministry that, especially with this YouTube ministry and so forth that's reaching around the world, I never would have found that if I had stayed there. But God had something else in mind. I had to look for the good. I don't know what good's going to come out of your depression. I don't know what good's going to come out. Maybe it's not even your good. Maybe it's good that you're going to offer to someone else and make a difference for them. But it will be your good because God plans for your good and His glory. That's what you can focus on. Write that verse down. And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them that are called according to His purpose. Put it on your bathroom mirror. Put it on your refrigerator door. Carry it in your pocket. Indeed, day after day, refer to that promise and look for the good. Because one of the problems with my focus in depression is focusing on what I'm feeling, focusing on what He promised. That's going to make a difference. It got me through that 6 months, and now it's been better than 5 years, 10 years, 10 years now. And we know that God has brought us through it all. And He's given us a ministry that we can't fully comprehend. The next one, I must change my goals. Okay? Remember how I said I looked at that pillow and just wanted to lay back down again? You're identifying with that? Well, what I suggest, you should never go to bed at night without setting your goals for the next day. That's right. You need to have something planned to do the next day. So don't go to bed at night without setting your goals for the next day. And make them as early as possible because you got to get up and involve other people. So you got to get up and you got to meet someone here at a certain time and so forth. You see, if it's all about me, sometimes, well, I can sleep another hour. It won't make a difference. No, you've got to be and meet someone someplace, sometime, and so forth. So make your plans the night before you go to bed. Set your alarm clock. Get up and get going. I must change my thinking. Okay, one of the beautiful things about me is when I had to prepare the sermons, I had to think differently. Okay, and it was almost like a therapy to me. Oh, don't get me wrong, it was for the sake of the congregation, it was my way of ministering to them, but it was ministering to myself. So I've got to change my way of thinking. Don't think on the negative. That's the beauty of the Scriptures. Think upon those Scriptures. Think upon this Romans 8:28. Focus on these things. Think about God's desire for something new for you, something different. Think about the changes and how you're going to deal with those changes, of those things that are forever different in your life. Make plans and think about those plans. But change your way of thinking. Don't just think, I can't beat this, it's too much for me. It doesn't, you don't conquer it in a passive way. So think of something you can do to overcome it. Okay? So change your thinking. I need to change my attitude. My attitude towards the depression is the idea that I'm focusing on myself. One of the things that made the difference for me when I was going through the hospital, suddenly I was focusing on them. The more I focused on myself, the worse it was. Can I challenge you to do this? Go and find someone you can help. When you're going through a difficult time yourself, find someone else you can minister to. Find someone else you can help. And in so doing, a couple of things are going to happen. You need to be needed. It's one of the primary requirements of the human life. You need to be needed. So you're going to put yourself in a place where you're helping others and they need you. And that's important when it comes time to deal with depression. I am needed. I've got to overcome it. The Apostle Paul overcame it. And one of the thoughts he had is, for your sakes, I need to be here. So he overcame this by forcing himself to work through this because they need me. People need you, and if you don't feel that's happening, then make yourself available to people. So what you're doing then is changing your activities and so forth to get involved in other people's lives and to keep you active. Okay? Now also, I must change my beliefs. Incidentally, with changing my activities, when I lose interest in something, force yourself to be motivated so that that activity you're doing will bring that interest back. Remember how we shared how that interest is lost because you're not motivated. Well, your activities, force yourself to do them till that interest comes back. So keep yourself active. Okay, I must change my beliefs. Here's the belief that I'm talking about. One of the belief things that comes with depression is, I'm never going to beat this. This is too much. You need to change that belief right now. You need to realize you can overcome it, you will overcome it, and you need to tell yourself every day and every hour if necessary, I'm going to beat this. Change your belief system. Now, again, I'm challenging you with the scriptures, a biblical pathway through depression. When we challenge you with the scriptures, it's like the idea that I believe what God said. And so I can focus on my belief that God is with me, He understands me, and He's going to bring me through it. He has something good planned for me. Back to Romans 8:28. Change your belief system. Change to believe that God has got good coming out of this. Okay? And then number 7, I need to change my prayer to praise. I have discovered that prayer can be one of the most depressing things in the world. Why? Because of the way people pray. They pray with their burdens in mind, and they tell God all about their burden. Then they feel they have to tell God how to deal with the burden. I once read a paper that said you had to pray specifically. Well, I'm sorry, but my specific prayer was to get this depression away from me, God. But when I also looked at it, there was other people that would be involved in it. So how do I say, you've got to change this, God, when God wants to work me through this so that I can help someone else? How can you be specific if you don't know what other lives are going to be met when God answers your prayer? But what you do need to do is believe that God knows what you need. Now, here's what I challenge people to do. What happens there in their prayer life, they spend all their time with their problem and really aren't even focusing on God. Prayer is about focusing on God. Not just telling Him what I want, but asking Him what He wants. And so with this, you need to spend your time in your prayer focusing on God. Here's what I challenge people to do. In the Old Testament, there's a story of a King Hezekiah. Now, King Hezekiah was the king of Judah. And Sennacherib was the king of Assyria. He brought 185,000 soldiers down to besiege the city of Jerusalem. And they were camped around it, and nobody would go in or out without their letting it happen. So they sent a letter. He sent a letter up to the people in Jerusalem and said, don't listen to your king. Your God is not going to deliver you. Look what he did here, here, and here, and so forth. And, he was specific in it. And Hezekiah got the letter, and he read it. He went up to the temple and he laid the letter on the altar of the temple and invited God to read it. Do you know God can read in any language? And so this is what God did. He read the letter. The next morning when Hezekiah got up, there was 185,000 dead soldiers around the city of Jerusalem. King Sennacherib ran for his life, and his 2 sons followed him and killed him. What was the results? The results was God answers prayer, even if I can't be specific. Even if I don't know how to pray about this depression, God hears my prayers. So in your prayer, write them down, what you're dealing with. Those worries, if it's caused by stress, those stressors, those worries, write them down. Give them to God. You don't even have to read them. Give them to God in your prayer time. Say, God, this is my burden. This is my need. Please help me with that. Now spend your time talking to God or listening to God. Open up the scriptures. Read some of those blessed Psalms. The 23rd Psalm, so beautiful. Read some of those things that God is trying to tell you. Spend that time in praise and worship of God. I thank you, God, that I'm here in your presence and you're working in my behalf. Now you're going to spend your prayer time with God and not with your problem. God knows what the problem is. You've given it to Him when you wrote it down and left it for Him to read. He knows what to do with it. Trust Him. He knows what to do with it. But in all of it, now you want to spend your time with God. You'd be surprised how prayer is much more relaxing now when you get to the place where you're ready to spend time with God rather than your problem. So there's 7 healthy changes that you need to make if you're going to overcome your depression. Let me just momentarily share some things. When I said the Apostle Paul went through this, I like to share this because this is something like the grief support group. When someone tells me what they're going through, I'm not the only one. Indeed, when someone wants to say, well, you don't have much faith and so forth, that's why you're depressed. Whoa, wait a minute. This man was a servant of Jesus Christ, an apostle who wrote most of the New Testament, and he faced depression. Now, let me tell you how I came into this encounter. I sat on the edge of the bed that day, and I opened up the book of Philippians, and I read the text where Paul says, I'm in a strait betwixt two, having a desire to be with Christ, but for your sakes he would be there. 2 things there. I was praying, God, let me die. Get me out of this. Even so, come quickly, Lord Jesus. Get me out of this. And I looked at that and I thought, Paul's praying the same way. He wants to go to be with Jesus. He's facing what I'm facing. He knows what depression is. And so later I went through the book of Philippians. I went through and I read some passages. What would cause him to be depressed? Okay? I'll make the quote. Or I'll quote the scripture reference. You write them down and you can look them up for a study. Or if you want to order that book from us, A Biblical Pathway Through Depression, write and order that and we'll try to get one to you. All of this is in there too. Okay? He speaks of sorrowful healing of a brother prevented added sorrow to him. He was feeling sorry for a brother that was sick. And so he was praying for him. Indeed, the quote is from Philippians chapter 2 and verse 27. Indeed, he was ill and almost died. But God had mercy on him, and not only on him, but also on me, to spare me sorrow upon sorrow. He was feeling the burden of someone else. And God indeed helped him by granting the healing, but he was sharing the burden, added to his depression. Concerned about the condition of the Philippian churches. Philippians chapter 2 and verse 19. I hope in the Lord Jesus to send Timothy to you soon, that I also may be cheered when I receive news about you. What's happening out there? He's in a prison cell. He doesn't know what's happening out there. The people weren't sending funds, and actually by the time this letter was written, funds had come, and it's a thank you letter, but it's also sharing much of what he was going through, worrying about them. Again, secondary depression was very much part. He was worrying about them. A lack of dedication of other ministers. Philippians 2 verses 20 and 21. I have no one else I have no one else like him who takes a genuine interest in your welfare. For everyone looks out for his own interests, not those of Jesus Christ. There was people that had the wrong dedication, wrong motivation. They were looking out for themselves. That concerned Paul. It was a burden. He had given everything to make the message of Christ reach out to these people, and they were not. Okay? Their service to him was lacking. Again, one of the things that had happened is that funds weren't coming in. Back in Paul's time, there wasn't finances and taxes to pay for the food and all that. So when money came in, he could get the food, but it wasn't coming. And he didn't know what was happening out there. It was depressing. Okay, false teachers were leading Philippian believers astray. Look that one up, Philippians 3, 18 and 19. Okay? The service that was lacking is Philippians 2:30. Philippians 2:30, service was lacking. Teachers and were leading the Philippians astray. Philippians 3, 18 and 19. This concerned him. He preached the truth. Now they're being led astray. If you read the book of Galatians, you see what happened in the church of Galatia, how the people were led astray, so forth. He desired to renew his fellowship with the believers. Philippians chapter 1 and verse 8. Oh, I want to be there with you. I want to get to see you, but I'm in this prison cell. That's depressing. The environment itself, but then the captivity that says he can't do what he wants to do. And enemies tried to increase his afflictions. Philippians 1 verses 15 and 16. Philippians 1 verses 15 and 16. And then comes that passage that I shared with you. I desire to be with Christ. But nevertheless, for your sakes. Okay, that's the passage. I desire to depart and be with Christ, which is better by far. But wait a minute, for your sakes, he would be there. Okay, my challenge to you again, based upon this, and we're about to close this, my challenge to you again is find places where you can minister to other people's needs. volunteer in programs. That way you are needed. And it's so very, very important for the person going through depression to know he is needed, she is needed. Find ways to reach out to others. So now you're focusing on them rather than yourself. It's amazing what a difference it'll make. People have asked me, in marriage counseling, I want a happy marriage. And I ask the question, how do you find happiness? You don't find happiness by seeking it. You find it by giving it away. If you can make someone else happy, one of the problems with depression, I'm seeking for happiness. But if I can find a way to make someone else happy, I'll find my happiness. So reach out to others. Reach out to others to help you walk through this. Reach out to others so you can walk with them in their circumstance. It's amazing what it will do to help you through your depression. Again, we thank you so much for letting us share these moments with you, and I hope that it has been beneficial to you. Indeed, if you want to contact Day 1 of Greater Altoona, we'll try to get one of those booklets to you. It's only 30-some pages. And that, again, is why we want it, because a person going through depression doesn't want to read volumes. And so, again, it's a key of overcoming depression. Okay, thank you so much. Our hope is, again, that these moments were beneficial to you. I hope that you will use this time and this DVD and video to go and share with others. Make it a group activity. If you're talking about depression groups, and again, there are groups out there dealing with depression, take this and share it with them and make it a discussion tool afterwards. I believe it's so important not to hide this to yourself, not to keep it inside, but to deal with it, overcome it, and you will not beat depression in a passive way. You've got to do something to overcome it. Again, I thank you. Have a better day now.